Hello everyone, Grandmaster Dejan Bojkov here with a video on the rook lifts. We tend to underestimate sometimes the power of the rook, but hey, this is the second best piece in the chess game. Besides the queen, which can also be lifted, we can increase the attacking potential of our pieces, especially when we have extra space, by shifting a rook. This is the fastest and the most effective way to attack. We bring the rook in front of the pawn chain, usually something like that, or from here, or from anywhere. There are various ways of bringing the rooks out, or from this side too, and we are ready to use it in just 2 moves. Rather than pushing the pawns forward and trying to trade them into open files for the rooks, this is way easier. Let me show you what I mean with the game Rusulimo with the white pieces against Reisman that was played back in 1967 in Puerto Rico. The start of the game is e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and we have the Italian game. After bishop c5, white played in quite a classical way. He grabbed the center, black reacted well with bishop e4 check, traded the bishops, and fought for the center with the move d5, which is one of the good moves in this situation. Otherwise, these two pawns on d4 and e4 are going to be too strong. After the capture, knight d5 and queen b3, knight e7, we have a typical theoretical position where white has an isolated pawn on d4, and black has very good control in front of that pawn with his 2 knights. He is actually doing well to keep those 2 knights there, because otherwise this bishop would be opened, and the pawn would be opened itself, and if you have studied Nimzowitsch, you know that this pawn on d4 is a very dangerous criminal that should be put into prison. This is what he used to say when he was blocking the pawns, when he wanted to stress on the importance of blockading the potentially dangerous pawns. Okay, the fact that there is an isolated pawn is actually clearly showing the plans for both sides. Black should try to trade pieces and to get into an endgame where the pawn can become a liability for white, while white is trying to make use of the juicy squares on e5 and c5, and the extra space to attack the opponent's king. How is he doing that? Well, first of all, he's taking the open e-file, and after that, Rusulimo came with a very interesting plan. He played the move a4. One idea is to stop that pawn from going too far away. Of course, b5 wasn't really a threat, but white wants to press that pawn with the move a5, thus keeping the bishop busy on c8, and eventually inactive, and because of that this rook on a8 is going to suffer too. But there is a hidden idea behind the move a4 that we're about to see in a moment. Here, black didn't quite understand what's going on, and he played the move b6. This is probably the first inaccuracy in the game, and quite a serious one. Instead of that, he should have followed the general plan that I mentioned before, trying to trade pieces with the move queen b6. This would have helped him reduce the pressure on his position. That pawn will no longer be in danger, and if white deviates from the trade of the queens by playing queen a3 or queen a2, he will get time to develop this bishop. Bishop can go to e6, or it can go to f5 or g4, anywhere it likes, and that would be more or less okay for black. But the move b6 that was chosen in the game gave a chance to white to jump with the knight on e5. This is the usage of the e5 square, the juicy square that I mentioned before, that outpost on e5. The knight is coming closer to the opponent's king. It puts pressure on c6, it puts pressure on f7, but also it opens the third rank. And the third rank can be used by the white pieces. After bishop e7, before using the third rank, white played a5, and he put more pressure on the queen side of the opponent. That pawn is annoying, and further on it can be pushed even far on a6 to attack the bishop on b7 and to completely restrict it. In fact, this is what Rusulimo did just a move later. After knight e4 and queen c7, he played a6, trapping the bishop for the time being on a8. Okay, the moment is very good for white. Even though black developed the bishop, it is not optimally placed on a8, and at the moment it is biting the granite, it is hitting the pawn on c6, it's not doing anything. This is very good time for white to try and to create threats on the king side. But how exactly? By swinging the queen over, queen to h3. Queen is hitting the pawn on h7, and there is another idea that white wants to do. He wants to bring another piece into the attack. Which piece? This rook on a1 via a3 and g3. The third rank is used as a highway to the opponent's position, to the opponent's king. The queen on h3 itself is quite a dangerous attacker, and if black tries to free himself with a move like c5, this queen can show teeth with the move knight g5. Now the threat is obviously checkmate on h7, and after h6, white has this below knight takes f7 and a rook f7, knight f7, queen to e6 check is already winning for white. The main reason being that, okay, if the king goes on e8, we're using the pin by rook number 1. The rook on e1 is greatly helping us attack, and we're winning material. While if the king goes to f8, now we make use of rook number 2, and we're shifting it along the third rank. Rook f3 is an unstoppable threat, and black cannot find a defense against this. This knight is not moving because of the checkmate on f7, and the other one is not moving because the one on d5 would be lost, which means that black is defenseless. Say knight g8, bishop d5 now is good enough to win the game, but even easier would be to play rook f3 first and only after that to take on d5 with extra material and tremendous attack. That's over. But look at this line, how the rook was shifted nicely along the third rank. First, the white pieces sacrificed themselves, the white knights, on f7, but they discovered the king, they dragged it out, and after that, the heavy pieces came behind the knights, and they created the decisive threats. Every single piece of the white pieces did a great job, including the bishop on c4, which was helping the queen to create mate threats on this diagonal, and sometimes the bishop was taking on d5. Therefore, in the game, black tried to defend with the move knight f4. That's quite reasonable. The knight wants to go to g6 and eventually to block the attack on the g file. Unfortunately though, it opens the bishop from c4, and white is obviously going to make use of that. On queen g4, for instance, now the move knight g6 can be answered knight takes f7 and bishop f7 check. This time it's going to be slightly different because white will attack with the knight and the queen, but again, quite devastating for black. The king got into the middle of the board, no pawn defenses. Queen g6 check is powerful threat to simply capture the knight, and also white has rook and 2 pawns for the 2 light pieces. Basically, he didn't sacrifice a thing. That's why in the game black played knight e to d5, trying to keep everything well defended. But this is where we see the rook lift. Finally, rook number 2 from the a file, which was doing pretty much nothing, is getting into the action. The one on the e file was already doing a lot. We saw the ideas with the sacrifices on f7. It was immediately working after that whenever the king goes to e8. It's time now to bring on the reserves. This rook wants to go to g3. After that, there'll be checkmate threat. This will force black to play g6. But whenever they play g6, we know that the pawns are not moving back, and we can eventually try to attack by maybe just attacking this knight, getting rid of it, and trying to open up that bishop. Or we can start pushing the h-pawn, further weakening the position, and preparing sacrifices. Knowing that, black tried to somehow reduce the pressure with the move knight e6. He's defending the pawn on g7, but now the problem comes from another side. The rook is already into the attack, don't forget about that rook on a3, but how to make contact with the queen and the knights? Rusolimo finds ingenious idea. First of all, he gets rid of this defender on the e5, which is a very nice piece, and because of that he gets an access to the f6 square. So far nothing really deadly for black. He can go with the king on h8, and now it looks like white didn't achieve much. If he sacrifices on h7, well, okay, this is definitely dangerous, but maybe black can defend by ignoring it and even going f5. I don't really believe that he can survive this, honestly, and that was one idea that white could have tried too, but instead of that he found an even better move, even more powerful and beautiful move. Queen to g6, immediately attacking the pawn on h7 and threatening checkmate in 1. queen takes h7 is a deadly threat. The problem for black is that he cannot take this annoying queen. If he takes it with the h-pawn, there is rook h3, that's mate in 1. If he takes it with the f-pawn, same problem. First of all, white is going to take on g6 with the knight, and then swing the rook over on h3 with checkmate. In all these lines, it is the rook which is delivering the final blow. Finally, if black tries to defend with a move like knight to g5, then white can simply take it. Now he'll be up a piece, and he will continue the attack. Please note that black cannot take on f6 because there'll be check, followed by checkmate on g3 for a change. The rook is going to deliver the checkmate along the g file. The only thing that black could invent in this situation was to go queen to c2, defending the pawn on h7 through on the diagonal. Now queen h7 is no longer checkmate, but the rook can still join the attack from h3, and the rook itself is ready to deliver the checkmate. This time black couldn't find enough arguments and he resigned. A possible line would have been queen takes g6, knight takes g6, and rook takes h7 checkmate. Or if black tries h6 in this situation, simply rook takes, pawn takes check, and checkmate on the next move. But it all started with the rook lift here, rook to a3, which gave a chance to white to bring the second most powerful piece into the attack, and together with the queen and the knights to deliver the checkmate. Such beautiful moves like queen g6 we can afford doing only if we have really huge attacking potential, a lot of pieces into the attack. Now, the next game that I want to show you was played between two former world champions at the time of the game. Boris Pasky playing with the white pieces against Mikhail Tal. The tournament is Montreal 1979, the Star Tournament. Tal playing with the black pieces got promising position from the opening. So Queen's Indian defense was played, and after b3 and knight b d7 here, queen e7 followed by rook d8, Tal quickly equalized. There was a clash in the center, the pawns disappeared, and Tal decided to take always with pawns on d5 instead of going for the safer continuations of taking with pieces and keeping the symmetry. He decided to break the symmetry and to get the so-called hanging pawns. Whenever we have hanging pawns, our plan is also very typical to the one that we have seen before with isolated pawn. The idea is the same: try to attack and try to avoid endgame. In the endgame, the pawns will become weaknesses. In the middle game, though, they are controlling a lot of central squares, and they give us a chance for successful break into the middle of the board. That's exactly what happened in the game after queen to c3, rook e8, rook d1. Tal did the excellent move d4. That's a very typical idea with the hanging pawns. We're opening the road for bishop number 2. This one is already opened and it is attacking the square h2. And white is in a sort of trouble at the moment because his pieces are getting blocked at the price of a pawn. Well, obviously he is forced to take on d4, there is nothing else. But then after c takes d4, he has to be extremely careful. To start with, queen takes d4 is not a great idea because after knight c5, black is releasing the power of that rook, and he has two powerful threats, the main one being bishop takes h2, check followed by rook d4, or first capture on d3 and then the same thing, and white is going to lose material no matter what. Queen d4 is not a good idea, but the move that Pasky did in the game, queen a5, wasn't a great idea neither. The only defense for him was to be brave enough and to take on d4 with the knight, when the position remains highly unbalanced, and Tal obviously wanted to sacrifice the bishop on h2 followed by knight g4. A lot of people can give up calculation at this stage, knowing how strong Tal is into the attack, and also seeing that the queen is coming next on h4, and most likely everything is going to end with checkmate after queen h4. This is a threat followed by checkmate, and this is also a threat followed by checkmate. But Pasky had a better move in this situation, king g3, the brave one. And a desperate one, I would say at the same time. And somewhere along the lines, the two great players missed that after queen e5 check f4 and queen e3 check, things are probably not as obvious as they seem to be. White can block it with either of the knights, and in case of knight f6, which is threatening knight moves on h5, but more importantly queen to f2, White has the idea of sacrificing the piece back with bishop takes h7, followed by queen e3. Or even better, here after knight 2 to f3, he can apply the same idea and trade the queens. And that will lead to very unclear endgame. But we are not so interested about the endgame, we are more interested about the middle game after queen a5. And what's so wrong about the queen on a5? Well, the thing is, black still got a chance to keep on attacking, and he's doing this by clearing the road of his bishops with a very strong move knight e5. Now give me the knight on f3. I want to take twice, and after that the bishop on d6 is going to become extremely strong, so this is more or less forced, but then the two bishops are already eyeing the king's side. h2 and g2 being in trouble. Pasky tried to defend himself with the move knight c4. Eventually trading one of the bishops will be a great idea, but have a look now at the king's side. There are no defenders left. And it's time for Tao to do something there. He did the move rook d5, giving the queen, and once the queen moved back, now we have everything ready. The rook came on d5, that's a very typical idea, and we can use the rook lift also when we are finishing the attack. And we want to reinforce the attack before it even starts, before the sacrifices. We want to have everything there, all the pieces. That's why rook d5, not the immediate bishop takes h2, which is what Tao wants to do, but first rook d5. The sacrifice now is deadly. On king takes h2, this rook is getting into the action, it is getting into the attack, and now in case of king to g3, this rook is helping deliver the checkmate. We can do knight e4 check, white is forced to take it, then check, check, and checkmate. All of this possible thanks to the powerful rook on h5, which gave a hand to the black queen to deliver the checkmate. After rook h5 check, the other possibility for white is to go king g1. That's exactly what Pasky did. But the problem here is that the knight is coming on g4, and black has pretty much every single piece once more into the attack. The main threat being that, imagine white does nothing, it's still black to move. He wants to bring this queen over on h4 and to deliver checkmate. He can do it immediately with queen h4, there is nothing wrong about this. But hey, we want to use this rook. This rook was lifted, it is into the attack, let's use it. Let's sacrifice it and win one tempo for the queen. After this check and check on h4, it's forced checkmate. Queen is coming on h1 victoriously, and that's it. And, alright, if instead of doing nothing, white tries to defend with queen to f4, this wouldn't help neither. Queen h4 is coming, and even though the rook didn't sacrifice itself, it gave a lot of support to the black pieces to deliver the checkmate. So, remember the two important things. We can shift the rook along the 3rd or the 6th rank, as well along the 4th or the 5th rank. If we have extra space, this is usually what happens when we play with isolated pawn, or when we have isolated pair of pawns and sometimes hanging pawns. These are the most typical pawn structures in which we use this rook lift. This is the fastest way to bring the second most important piece into the action and to help the queen deliver checkmates. And, well, I forgot to mention that we can also do it in situations like the stone wall, where we also have space advantage to bring on the reserves. If we bring the rook together with the queen and together with the knight and the bishop, that's more than enough to deliver checkmate. Thank you, and see you next time.